Namaste, everyone. Once again, I have Joel with me. We've done 3 episodes already. In the first one, he talked about how Hindu phobia he's analyzing, his organization is analyzing in a very scientific, analytical way, using artificial intelligence, using natural language processing, looking at the social media, how different memes come, how false information is spread, who does it, who spreads it, when is it human, when is it bots, and what is the impact, what are they trying to achieve, and what they actually end up creating on the ground in terms of violence, in the form of hate speech, all kinds of prejudices, and intercultural or inter-identity, inter-religious violence also. So this is his specialty, and in this episode we're going to talk about a very important person and the role of social media. This is a person named Afia Siddiqui, a very intelligent, educated woman from Pakistan who got a degree in MIT. She's a medical degree kind of person. And after all that, she went and joined the Islamic revolution, a Taliban worker, and got herself arrested in Afghanistan. And now she's sitting in a jail with a long-term sentence. So
for terror.
As a terrorist. So tell us about her first, and then we'll discuss the role of social media later.
Well, she's an unusual case. Well, it's actually not that unusual. You know, the profile of terrorists is often people who are quite not just active but intelligent and usually well educated
and from good homes.
And usually very often the case. It's a misconception that these are sort of like ruffians. Like many of them are very sophisticated. So, you know, she was arrested for attacks against U.S. military and plotting terror. And what happened was a movement sprung up, the Free Afia movement, that she's Al-Qaeda operative. And the idea was that her arrest was unjust, and that she's seen kind of as a martyr to some extent for many who are ISIS or Al-Qaeda supporters. Now, there was
she was killing U.S. troops in Afghanistan.
That's right.
So it's a pretty serious thing she did.
Absolutely.
And you know, even the image that there is of Al-Qaeda, it's all sort of masculine machoism. You don't expect women. I mean, this is very strange also.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes her so appealing, is that, you know, she's a striking young lady who's extraordinarily intelligent and well-spoken. And I think that there's a romantic component to the movement that's seeking to free her. They see her as, you know, emblematic of who they want to be and how they want to be seen. So we you know, there was an attack, of course, in Colleyville in Texas that was associated with the Free Afia movement, and this occurred, I think, last year. And maybe it was 2 years ago. No, it was last year. It was early last year. This occurred, and you know, the attack in Colleyville, Texas. There was a Pakistani national, Malik Akram. So
he was where? He was in Pakistan, or he was in Texas?
He was a Pakistani who initially he spent some time in England, and then ended up in Texas, playing in Texas. So, you know, how there was a synagogue that Malik Akram targeted, and he came in and held up 4 people there at gunpoint, and ended up at a standoff with local law enforcement. The rabbi there had been trained in what to do during these hostage situations, and, you know, ended up throwing a desk at Malik, and they all ran out, and they got away safely. Malik was killed in a firefight with law enforcement officials. But, you know, obviously the fact that a foreign national would come all the way to Texas and execute this in order to free Afia Siddiqui, which is something very few people were even that familiar with. So we wanted to understand if there could be interactivity between social cyber signals that were occurring online and these kinds of lone wolf behaviors that we were seeing, because it's not as though Siddiqui is that well, you know, known here in the United States or that well celebrated. So we did an analysis of the Free Siddiqui movement, and we noted that there was spikes of activity in the months preceding this attack. So there's quite a lot of agitation online about Siddiqui. Now, wouldn't you know it, there were groups in America, here in Texas. There was an outfit called CARE. Here in America, there's the council.
Very famous, very big, very powerful. Tell us about it, those guys.
So CARE is the Council of American Islamic Relations.
Right.
and they are a very well-funded and powerful organization. They're an advocacy group, and they were hosting events in Texas for freeing Afia Siddiqui, and putting rallies around that, and organizing mobilizations and protests, and kind of churning up this old issue. It turns out that the head of CARE in Texas was actually one of Siddiqui's previous attorneys. And maybe it was a previous head of CARE. I'm not sure it was the acting head at the time. In any case, they became very involved in this, and as they started promoting events around Texas, there was a network of self-identified Pakistani accounts that seized on this on the hashtag, on this kind of Free Afia activity. There were Salafists. There were a lot of Salafist influencers that were involved with this, and there was a lot of what we determined to be inauthentic activity that was amplifying this. Much of it coming from Pakistan. Now, the intriguing part about this is that amongst the events that CARE, there was a kind of, whenever you have a social graph of activity, you often have what's called a central node.
Yes.
A central node, which is like kind of the most connected between all the other graphs. Well, all the other nodes in the graph. Well, the central node, it turns out, on this graph was a Twitter account that was from this Pakistani group, was a Twitter account that was being promoted by CARE in Texas.
Wow.
And like the chances of that happening randomly are incredibly small.
Yeah.
And so what we saw was that there was clear signs of interconnectivity between these groups. And then as those social cyber signals, calling many of them anti-Semitic, calling for the freedom of Afia, were occurring online, within weeks of this, you see some Pakistani national showing up, at a synagogue and prepared to stage an attack. So you have an entire campaign being orchestrated in the real world
by a major organization.
That's churning out this kind of meme. And we talked about the way that memes kind of can create ideation.
Right.
That they prepare the ground for action because they're ideating.
Right.
So while you have that, you have this activity in Pakistan that's really churning up the volume in a really volatile way. I mean, the stuff that they're putting out online is extremely demonizing and highly anti-Semitic. And then you have a Pakistani national with this information exchange happening between Texas and Pakistan. You have some Pakistani nationals showing up in Texas and attacking a synagogue pretty close to Dallas in a fairly, and you have to really go out of your way to get there. This was really considered. So, all of this, is there a smoking gun there? Well, not exactly. We can't say for sure that this is a state operation by Pakistan to do et cetera. We can't say for sure that CARE knew that this was going to happen. But with the social cyber domain, it creates a lot of opportunities and avenues for network-to-network communication with a lot of winks and nods. And, it allows for the individuals...
But CARE has been in legal trouble in the US before.
Absolutely. Well, CARE has made a lot of statements that CARE officials have made statements that have been perceived as highly anti-Semitic in recent history,
and linked with violence.
In fact, saying that we should be monitoring or we should be scrutinizing, or they use harsher language than this. I just don't want to misstate that here while we're on air. But maybe we can find the quote afterwards and put it up. But they were saying essentially that we should take note of these Zionist infiltration synagogues, right? So kind of already saying that synagogues are kind of hotbeds of hostile, invasive.
So just to let you know, I've had interactions concerning CARE with respect to their ideas on Hinduism and Hinduphobia, and they've been very actively. A lot of Hinduphobic people, both Muslims and ultra-left, have been associated with CARE.
Yes.
And they attend their events and they talk about, so they kind of feed CARE. And CARE might have, I'm not sure, but they might have a large South Asian component of people who are managing it in this country.
Yeah, look, I think that it goes far beyond the scope of the research that we did to understand how American 501c3 organizations play into the ecosystem of radicalization or polarization that can churn out that can kind of reliably churn out these kinds of problems. And I think we were very careful in the report to make that limitation as clear as we could possibly make it. But we know that there have been a lot of funding issues and investigation around like the involvement of foreign funding in organizations like CARE, and that remains a kind of consistent challenge because the 501c3 system offers a great way for people, for nation states, for
is there foreign funding, Saudi or Qatari, or where is it from?
Well, I mean, that goes beyond, again, that goes beyond the sort of the report that we did. But I mean, what we did do was we spoke to the chief of intelligence for Colleyville, and he ended up, talking to us about this report. And really, when they're encountering problems like this, they're not looking for any of the social cyber signals that we found. They're not looking for Pakistani involvement. They're not seeing the role of the institutions that are taking shape and how that's all being orchestrated through the social cyber domain, right? So even though that's all happening publicly, law enforcement officials who have to manage the safety of Hindu temples, who have to manage the safety of synagogues and churches and mosques, right? They don't understand how these houses of worship have become a front line in a war that they know very little about, where the players and actors who are...
This is also a legal issue of what's the causal relationship and boundary between free speech, which is hate speech, and hate crime.
Well, it's a good question. I think a lot of people I think going back to the discussion we've started having already, a lot of these issues around hate could rapidly be resolved around authenticity.
Right.
People are their worst selves. We know this.
Yeah, because part of the game is to engage in hate speech and create violence without being linked and connected.
Absolutely. Because the dream everyone has is the dream of invisibility. The ability to sort of act but not be seen. The privilege of being able to cause the problems you can't be blamed for.
Right.
It's a fantasy every child has. And the internet, whenever we know from social psychology that whenever you have people where their reputation isn't at stake in their behavior, it will always incentivize the worst behaviors, because our moral sensibilities all arrive from the need we have to protect our reputation.
Right.
And once that's out, so is a lot of the constraints that we have on our own
then
behavior.
the bad guys have to be openly bad.
Yeah.
Like the Bin Laden type. They have to
100%.
openly come out and say, hey, listen, this is what I believe. But at least you know that.
Yeah, exactly. And robbed of that capacity, what we're left with is like the ability, what we're left with is really, really hateful ideas with no one responsible for them. So I think that's, that it goes back to the point we're making about the need for authenticity, that it's not so much the speech issue as much as it is the way in which covert efforts and agitation by the worst ideas and powerful nation states and extremist groups, like they create an inability for people to meaningfully interact.
Right.
And instead of talking to a human being, you're talking to a meme, you're talking to a threat.
Right. So this is very important. This is the fourth case study we've looked at that you have uncovered. The first was Hindu phobia in general.
Yes.
Second was this Leicester
riots
in England between Hindus and Muslims, how
Yep.
they were instigated. And then the third was Khalistan, and the fourth is this.
That's exactly right. And through these examples, what we've done in a hierarchical fashion is describe the different mechanisms that are at root in the ways that violence takes place against ethnic communities and vulnerable communities from the social cyber domain. In each case, what we've seen is that the social cyber domain becomes an intrinsic and necessary component in order for the tactic of violence to succeed. Whether that's populist mobs that are taking advantage of malicious narratives on social media in order to incite additional violence or organize it, whether that's deliberate networks and state actors that are conjoined in order to influence specific outcomes of violence in ways that are directed towards specific targets regularly all over the world, or whether that's lone wolves who are being inspired by violence, or perhaps worse, being suggested by intelligence agencies or others to attack based on a groundswell of propaganda and hatred that's being churned up ahead of time, right? In each of these cases, I think what we see are mechanisms where violence becomes instrumental across several different modes of organization in order to fulfill the ideation and memes of the online climate.